With the Monaco Grand Prix coming up next week, there are going to be inevitable discussions over the event as a whole. For quite a while now, many fans of Formula 1 have voiced their dissatisfaction of a boring race that lacks overtaking and is just a procession for 78 laps, with cars that are way too big for a circuit that doesn't even meet the FIA's length requirements for a venue on the calendar. They bemoan its inability to produce decent racing product, and with the Indianapolis 500 along with the Coke 600 in NASCAR happening on the same weekend as the Monte Carlo event, many fans, especially the American ones that F1 are constantly trying to attract by adding races in car parks and street circuits in big cities, may end up focusing on the other crown jewels that are going on at the same time. But unlike many other content creators, I'm going to defend the inclusion of the Monaco race on the F1 schedule, and I hope it's enough to convince you why Monaco needs to stay on the Formula 1 calendar.
Manuel Fangio is in the lead on the last lap of the German Grand Prix.
Jim Clark drives the Formula 1 Lotus Sport to victory on the racetracks of the world.
And look at that! How that colossally, that's Mansell! That is Nigel Mansell! Alain Prost has taken the advantage. Senna is trying to go through on the inside, and it's happened immediately! This is amazing! Senna goes off at the first corner.
And I've got to stop because I've got a lump in my throat.
Since its inclusion in the first Formula 1 season in 1950, the Monte Carlo circuit has been one of the trickiest tracks that any driver can race on. It has barriers that are right next to the racing surface, and you have to basically skim right past them if you want to put in a good lap. There are other circuits that have walls close by like Singapore and Jeddah, but even they have open sections where you can make a mistake and amble off the circuit while avoiding a crash. Apart from at the Nouvelle Chicane, the swimming pool portion of the circuit, and maybe Saint-Devote if you bail out early enough, that's not possible for the majority of Monaco. If you make a mistake, you're crashing a lot of the time. Admittedly, as F1 cars have become more on rails and dependent on downforce than ever before, the likelihood of an error leading to an accident is greatly reduced compared to 10, 20, 30 or even 40 years ago, but nonetheless, you can't get around a lap successfully without a great deal of talent and concentration. Three-time champion Nelson Piquet once said that driving the Monte Carlo track is like riding a bicycle around your living room based on how difficult it is to navigate due to its narrowness. Throughout several sections you have to thread the eye of the needle, such as the entire third sector where being slightly offline through any part of it could seriously hamper your lap, or even worse, make you bin it. But it's not just how hard the layout is, it's how unique it is. Any fans of F1 from the 1980s and early 90s can remember the swathe of American street circuits that came in, namely Detroit, Dallas and Phoenix, that tried and failed along with Caesar's Palace to fill the void left by Watkins Glen dropping off the calendar, but none of them had a long-lasting impact on our sport. Detroit lasted 7 seasons, Dallas had only one race in 1984 that everyone hated, and despite Phoenix hosting a famous battle between Ayrton Senna and a young John Alesi, the track in Arizona lasted only 3 years. This is where Monaco's uniqueness comes in. I've driven all 3 of the aforementioned tracks in the USA on the sim, and the thing you notice isn't the narrowness, it's the layouts themselves. 90% of the corners are 90 degrees, and while that's not necessarily the fault of anyone other than the planners who designed the city, you look at Monaco and it's got constant radius corners and a variety of different shapes. Saint-Devote, although a little point and squirt, isn't too clumsy. The run up the hill through Beau Rivage, through Massenet and Casino Square is so nicely flowing when you get it right. Then although Mirabeau is very slow because it's not particularly sharp, it doesn't feel awkward at all. Admittedly, the Lowe's or Fairmont or the station hairpin or whatever you want to call it nowadays is a bit strange because all you're doing is going full lock and waiting to get around the thing with no throttle or brake inputs. Portier 1 is nice, and while the second part is quite angled, it's good for the run through the tunnel. The modern day Nouvelle Chicane requires commitment without either A, hitting the inside wall, or B, going too deep, and when you get it right it's amazing. Then I'd argue the section from Tabac, through Louis Chiron, Swimming Pool, Rascasse and Anthony Nogues is the single most flowing section of any street circuit on the F1 calendar. Bin off the S's in Jeddah, or the left-right flick in Melbourne, the third sector in the Principality is where it's at. There is no other circuit like Monaco, and that's a fact.
Fact. That is true.
The second reason why it needs to stay on the schedule stems from a point I made earlier. Nelson Piquet said that Monaco is like riding a bike in your living room, and he's not wrong, but since his first world title in 1981, F1 cars have grown from 4.4 metres long, or just under 15 feet, to about 5.7 metres long, or 19 feet. Their width has remained at about 2 metres since the 80s, even getting as big as 2.15 metres during the 1990s. The growth of the cars, along with the extra bulkiness and weight that comes with safety advancements, has created a situation where since about 2009, when they switched away from smaller, nimbler chassis to ones geared purely for downforce by making the noses longer and the wings bigger, the cars have been way too big for the Monaco track. This was exacerbated with the 2017 regulations, and it's not gotten better since then. Before the wider and more aggressive cars came in 7 years ago, it was very hard to get past other drivers, but not impossible, and this is proven by the numbers. In 2016, 14 on-track overtakes were made, whereas the year after it was 3. 3 overtakes in a 78-lap race. That's awful. Therefore, I can ascertain that the cars are indeed the problem. To further prove my point, in the 2021 race, there were no overtakes at all in the last year of the pre-ground effect cars. Now, you might rebuttal this argument with the idea that other circuits still have good racing, and that proves that Monte Carlo is the problem, not the cars. However, I present to you Formula E. Now, Formula E has slower cars than F1, much slower in fact, with lap times about 20 seconds slower, but the cars are also 70 centimeters shorter in length and 30 centimeters shorter in width than Formula 1 cars. The result of this is that last year's E-Prix saw 116 overtakes in 29 laps, and if that was upscaled to 78 tours of a circuit like the F1, that's 309 in total. Now obviously, you can't rule out that the only reason that the racing product is better in Formula E is because the cars are smaller and designed for street circuits, but they're also more robust, slower, and the drivers are more aggressive when going for moves. But surely F1 can learn something from its electric counterpart, even if it's still a much faster and high-profile series. Make the cars smaller, lighter and more robust, although it is harder to make the cars stronger if you're going to downsize them too, but doing so would greatly improve racing product, not just in Monaco, but everywhere. Another point about overtaking is the application of DRS. There are several circuits where fantastic opportunities to put a DRS zone are ruined because they either have a slight curve or a flat-out corner that would be too unsafe to run with the rear wing open. 130R at Suzuka comes to mind as the obvious example, but the tunnel in Monaco is another. I've always believed that DRS is rubbish, not only because it either makes it far too easy or near impossible to overtake based on how long the deployment zones are, but also for the fact that it makes making moves outside of predefined areas of the circuit pointless, because you'll be easily re-overtaken just a corner or two later. I have 2 propositions to solve this. If F1 is desperate to keep DRS for some reason, what they should do is have it so that as soon as a driver gets within a second of someone else, they can use a drag reduction system whenever they please until they get past, then it gets automatically shut. Basically, make it the same system like they had in qualifying in 2011. Now obviously you'd still have to have it banned in some places where it would be sketchy, but it would open up overtaking to the entire circuit, not just 2 or 3 corners per lap. It would particularly benefit circuits like Imola and Abu Dhabi that are currently a bit boring because they have straights that aren't really long enough for an effective DRS zone right now, but would be with a system like this. Another option is a push-to-pass system like IndyCar has, or one similar to KERS where it's driver-controlled and again would open up the entire track to overtaking. Now that was a bit of a detour from the point of the video, but both of these solutions would also benefit overtaking at Monaco. The track is still suitable for F1, even if it's a bit short, just make the cars smaller. The third point I'm going to make stems from the main critique of Monaco. Most people say that the racing there is a boring procession every single year with no chance at an overtake, but that's simply not true. 2023 was a banger with wet weather, 2022 was also decent in the rain, and although the 2021 race was a bit useless, 2018 and 19 both saw intense fights for the lead. Now yes, in those two, cars that shouldn't have won did take victory, as it was Daniel Ricciardo that won despite being severely down on power in the former, and Lewis Hamilton being on severely worn tyres in the latter. But even if no overtakes were made, one mistake or one big lunge could have easily changed the outcome. It was edge-of-your-seat action even if no action ever came. 2016 was a rainy classic with Ricciardo's botched pit stop, 2014 was another fantastic race with an underdog story thanks to Bianchi's Marussia, and 2012 was decent too, so that means that 7 of the last 11 races at Monaco were at least good, with only 1 of the last 5 being mediocre. The idea that it's always a procession is simply not true, as even if it's nearly impossible to overtake, that in itself increases the excitement because if or when a pass does happen, it makes it even better. If we look at other circuits, such as Imola, Miami, Abu Dhabi and Monza, the racing product there is also mostly boring too, but they aren't being taken off the calendar anytime soon. Branching off from the races being better than people make out, let's also talk about qualifying. For the most part, modern F1 qualifying is probably the only part of the sport that hasn't been affected by gimmicks if you ignore the awful elimination thing in 2016. However, its main flaw has been exposed in recent years at Monaco. Several times in Q3, drivers have crashed or gone off, whether by accident or on purpose, to get pole position. Michael Schumacher. In 2021 and 22, there was controversy as the eventual pole sitters in each, Charles Leclerc and Sergio Perez, crashed out, which ensured their pole positions stayed. In my opinion, any person who causes a red flag in Q3 should have their fastest time deleted, so there is an incentive not to push too hard if you are already on provisional pole position at a track like Monaco. When the leaders aren't binning it though, qualifying on the tight streets is the best of the season as it always throws up entertainment and at least one underdog performance. I vividly remember watching Guido van der Garde nearly get a Caterham into Q3 in 2013, and there are countless other examples, such as Alonso in 2023 nearly getting pole before Max snatched it away at the last second. Monaco is undoubtedly the best qualifying session of most seasons, and I think that's a reason it should stay on the calendar. Another reason is the track layout. Now, I've already mentioned how it's unique and difficult and narrow and all that, but it's also not fully geared for overtaking. I can hear you all collectively saying, well done genius, I couldn't have figured that one out myself. But what I mean is, modifications can be made to improve the racing. Now the first sector is pretty much unchangeable, but the modifications can begin at Portier. There's a roundabout where Portier 2 is, and you can go around it to make the track a bit longer. It won't increase overtaking there, but it will increase the length of the flat-out section through the tunnel and down the hill. Then comes the Nouvelle chicane. Nowadays, it's a one-line corner and impossible to overtake on, and you can't really widen it, so just get rid of it. Now people might be saying, that's dangerous because what if two cars make contact at top speed and one goes over the barrier, flying into the boats in the harbour? Point number 1, catch fencing and barriers. Ovals make catch fencing work just fine, and with the halo there wouldn't be any problems with it coming into contact with a driver's head and body like there were in the 80s. Also, when was the last time an F1 car actually properly took flight? Not just off the ground like the Lotuses in Silverstone in 2015, but instead like Gutierrez in Bahrain in 2014. I genuinely can't remember the last time this happened, although if cars do become lighter like I suggested, it would make them more susceptible to flying in crashes. In order to facilitate the longer straight into the back, we'd have to widen it, and that's possible for the most part until you get to the entry of the corner itself. Now this would create a bit of a bottleneck, but I think it would be fine. Then you can skip the swimming pool chicane by using some of the free land next to it, thus making a flat run from to back to a much less tight Rascas corner. This would also leave more room for better pit lane facilities. Now those layout changes would definitely alter the character of the track and make it a lot closer to the 1 minute mark for lap time, but it would greatly improve overtaking. F1 aren't using the tools they have to their disposal because they're scared of altering a historic layout, not realising that even the most iconic circuits have undergone significant changes to remain relevant as racing has developed over the years. Monaco should do the same to give itself a fighting chance. Now up to this point, most of my reasons to keep this legendary track on the calendar are based on modern times. Whether it's the racing, the qualifying or the layout, I don't think I've been stuck in the past and been blinkered by recent years. But my last point is entirely based on history. To give an anecdote, in England there has been extensive debate in recent years about the potential scrapping of the FA Cup, the oldest football competition in the world. Since the rise of the Premier League and its big clubs, focus has been shifted away from domestic cup competitions to the league and intercontinental tournaments because the amount of money involved in both is far greater than the FA Cup could ever muster. A few years ago, Manchester City earned £189 million prize money for winning the Premier League. Meanwhile, for taking the FA Cup trophy, they took home a paltry £3 million. Because of fixture congestion, many have suggested that abolishing the smaller tournaments would give the bigger teams less games and thus mean less injuries and better player welfare, but the smaller clubs outside of the top division benefit greatly from a good cup run, as £3 million would mean a lot, even to a mid to low level second tier side. It's a similar situation with the Monaco Grand Prix, minus the last point. If you stop having the most prestigious event of the year, that nullifies and voids much of the history of the sport and all of the history of the race itself. Why bother saying that Senna's record 6 wins around here was a fantastic achievement if it's literally impossible to beat him? It's a race that sorts the men from the boys, and you can't win it if you don't have immense skill. Even lucky winners, like Olivier Panis, had to keep their car on track when no one else did, and every legendary driver has won the race several times, with the exception of Jim Clark. Every single driver says that they love the track, and apart from their home race, they want to win Monaco. They deserve a say in it too, as without them, there's no F1. I know without the fans, there's also no F1, and without the mechanics, there's no F1, and without the marshals, there's no F1, but the drivers do deserve a say too. It's not always exciting for us fans, but that's not how it's supposed to be. Seasons like 2021 have clouded our judgment as to what is a good F1 season, because if every single race was a classic, then no race would be a classic. Anyways, I think that ends today's video. I hope you enjoyed me detailing why I think Monaco needs to stay on the F1 calendar. Make sure to like and subscribe and comment down below if you agree with me. Big shout out to my Patreon subscribers, Andy Lamberts and Eamon Al Dowdy, and if you'd like to get videos early or simply support the channel, subscribe to my Patreon yourself for as little as $1 per month. You can also follow my Instagram for behind the scenes content and posts pertaining to new videos. But without further ado, I'm Nedzo, and I'll see you all later. Bye!